Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Jamie Vasovic, and with me is Renelle Weathers. We're from the Michigan League for Public Policy, and welcome to Exploring the Deep Sea Budget, the KConnect budget training. Again, I'm the Community Engagement Director with the Michigan League for Public Policy. Renelle is our outgoing Community Engagement Director, is now on a consultant with the League. A little bit about the Michigan League for Public Policy. We are a nonpartisan policy institute dedicated to economic opportunity for all. We've been around for over 110 years. We're the only state-level organization that addresses poverty in a comprehensive way and analyzes the impact of state and federal budgets and policy on residents with low incomes. And of course, everything we do is through a racial equity lens. Our mission is to advance economic security, racial equity, health, and well-being for all people in every part of Michigan. And again, regardless of race, place, or income, we want everybody in Michigan to be able to thrive. We also, the way that we go about this work is through data. So there's lots of budget briefs and policy briefs that we put out. We also have our kids count data, but then we're also listening to community as well. We do that through our community engagement team. And then, of course, we do advocacy. All of our policy analysts are registered lobbyists. And so we're out there fighting for the best practices that we feel to move Michiganders forward. And again, we're advocating from what we hear from community and the data that we put out. So today's agenda, we're going to be racing through civics to give you a taste of that. So yes, I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. We'll be doing that. And then we're going to wade through the state budget cycle, and then we're going to go ahead and dive deep into that budget and actually go to the House Fiscal Agency website and take a look through there and see where do we actually find a budget. So let's get started and race through those civics. The first thing we want to think about is, how does policy touch our life? It touches every single aspect of what we do, from our schools and roads to when it is you get to vote, to when your trash gets picked up, especially if you live in the city, what your financial aid, whether you've got clean water or not, affordable housing, all of those things are due to policy. And so policy is very, very, very important. And a lot of those things are funded by our budget and what we put in our budget. So the budget is a very important piece. So let's take a look at first how things get started. So looking at the makeup of our state government, we have 110 areas in the House of Representatives, so little districts. And right now we have Democratic control, 56 Democrats to 54 Republicans. On the Senate side, it's much less. We've got 38 districts, and 20 of those are held by Democrats to 18 Republicans. So we also have Democratic control in the Senate. And of course, we have our governor, who is a Democrat as well. So we've got full Democratic control, which has not happened in the past 40-some years. So it's really important to know who holds power in the House, because those are the people that are going to be in charge of leadership and determine what the agenda is going to be. So it's important to know who's in power, and we'll get into that a little bit more as well. So how does a bill become a law? Now, in the state of Michigan, you'll often hear the House or the Senate referred to as a chamber. And the reason we do that is because a bill can start in the House or the Senate. It doesn't matter. It can start in either chamber. So the first chamber that it goes through, it's going to get introduced. Then it's going to move to committee. Then if it passes committee, it will move to the floor. If it passes the floor and that first chamber, it will then move to the second chamber and it will go straight to committee. If it passes that committee, then it will go to the floor for a vote. If it passes the floor, then it can move to the governor to be signed or vetoed. So when a bill first gets introduced, there are lots of things that influence a bill. The governor can influence a bill, departmental staff, interest groups, lobbyists. And again, we always think of these lobbyists as villains with a thin mustache with a little twirly at the end, trying to do evil deeds. But again, lobbyists are also a bunch of us who are trying to go out and do good. A lot of the organizations that we like, that from environment to the Michigan League for Public Policy, fighting to do good as well. Those are lobbyists as well. So those people are influencing bills. Constituents, yes, constituents do have a lot of power and do come up with ideas for bills. When we think about PFAS and what was happening there, or lead that was happening, a lot of those issues were because of constituent concerns come in that we need to do something. Sometimes even grocery stores or where railroad crossing and things are. Those are all ideas that have come from constituents. So constituents do have a lot of power and influence as well. And of course, we have business groups as well, like the chamber. And so they're all people who are influencing the bill, but we also have people who are trying to make sure that everything that's in the bill is supposed to be there. So we've got our legal bill drafters taking a look at language and what happens there. We've got our nonpartisan staff. So we've got the House Fiscal Agency and the Senate Fiscal Agency, and they're taking a look at how does this affect the budget. And we actually have that at the federal level too. And then we have partisan staff. So we've got House Dems and Senate Dems and Senate Republicans and so forth that are having their say in as to what that bill should look like, and the governor and departmental staff as well. So we have all these hands that are touching this before a bill is even introduced to get it to where it needs to be. The other thing we need to think about is who our decision makers are. So we talked about who's in power, right? That's really important because they're going to pick who their leadership is. And our leadership is our Speaker of the House, our Senate Majority Leader, and of course our governor. And they determine the agenda and what's really kind of happening and what's going to be most important and what they want to do. So they're really important players as well. And then we have our committee chairs of all of those different committees that are happening, from appropriation committee and subcommittees to health and human services to corrections, all of these different committees. And guess who decides who sits, or who's not only sits on those committees, but also who is going to be the chair of those committees? Leadership decides who that's going to be. So our Speaker of the House and our Senate Majority Leader, they decide who those committee chairs are and who sits on those committees. And then of course, we also have our committee vice chairs. So you're going to have two vice chairs, one a majority vice chair and a minority vice chair, and they can be very influential as well. Then on top of that, we just have members of both chambers that are going to be very influential. One of those is definitely going to be appropriation and subcommittee chairs. The appropriation chair is highly does a ton of fundraising, gets a lot of top their donations. So they're a very important person to know, and they really control those purse strings of the governor as the legislature. So very important to know, and they have a lot of power as well. So we really need to know our decision makers because they are determining what happens. And so when we think about our committee chairs, they're really important because remember, only 10% of bills, 10 to 12% of bills come out of committee. They decide if a bill gets a hearing. They decide if they're going to take that up, and then they're going to vote to decide whether that bill, all committee members, whether that bill goes to the floor or not. So this is a great time for public input. This is where they're going to pull in people for testimony. Could be the bill sponsor or staff, departmental staff. You're going to have subject matter experts. You're going to have interest groups, lobbies, and yes, constituents. Constituents can come in and testify as well. And this is really important as a way to say, this is what we want or don't want to happen. And this is also where you're going to have amendments or substitutions. So you might have things in that bill that you want to take out, or things that you want to add in. This is a really great time to do that. And again, the committee is going to report this bill for floor action, or it's going to die, and it's going to be the end of its journey. So if a bill does then make it out of committee, remember, then it goes to the floor for action. So after, if you recall, it goes to the next chamber and it goes through the same process over again. So now we've got two different bills, But because of all these amendments and substitutions, they're not identical, and they absolutely have to be identical. So after they go through both chambers, through committee and floor, it needs to go to conference committee. And guess who decides who sits on conference committee? You guessed it, the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader, and there's always more of the majority party than there is the minority party. And that committee is going to iron out, they can't make any amendments or substitutions at this time, but they're going to make those bills identical. And then from there, it will go to the governor, who will sign or veto the bill. Now, they are able to go ahead and do, let's say the governor vetoes the bill and the legislature is like, that's crazy, we think this should happen. They can do a veto override, but it does require a 2/3 majority vote. So, since this is recording, if you have any questions, we can't take them right now. However, you can always email us at jvasovic@mlpp.org or Renell Weathers at mlpp.org, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. So if you recall from our last training, we talked about 3 main routes to change state policy via legislation, budget, or ballot. And obviously today we're going to talk a lot about the budget. And if you recall, the budget, there's different ways that it can do that. It's going to fund programs, and you're going to find line items for each of these things. And so when the budget is spelled out, you're going to have a line by line item of what that does. They're also going to have what they call boilerplate language. They'll talk about the intent and how that money can be used. And then they'll do one-time funding, or they could do ongoing funding. You're also going to find budget items for pilot programs. Think about Tri-Share program. That was a pilot program. And we're also going to have legislative reports as well. So the one thing we talk about with budget and taxes is we really talk about the budget as a moral document. If you really want to see what's important to a people and to the state, take a look at the budget. And that really comes from Dr. Barber from the Poor People's Campaign. And again, we just really identify with that. This is really tells us what we value. And when we're looking at the budget, there's really 2 things we need to think about, expenditures and revenue, and they're really 2 sides of the same coin. We can't spend, so have expenditures, we can't spend things if we don't have revenue coming in. And with the state budget, it absolutely has to be a balanced budget. So the federal government can go into debt, but the state absolutely cannot. It's a constitutional requirement that we have a balanced budget. So we cannot spend more money than we are taking in. So let's wade through our state budget cycle. Our state budget cycle is a continuous 12-month process. In other states, fun tidbit, their whole legislative session may only be 3 months. But our state, which is a bicameral legislature, was modeled after the federal government. And so our budget cycle very much models that as well, except for, of course, we can't go into debt. So let's take a look at that budget cycle and what you can do. So starting in February, the governor releases her proposed budget. From the start of session, she has 30 days to release her budget. If it's a new governor, they have 60 days to do so in their first year. Otherwise, it is those 30 days. So this is a really good time to meet or contact your state legislator. And you want to sign up for budget email alerts from the league, because this is our bread and butter. We are looking at the budget all the time. So we have budget briefs. You can get budget information from us, so you can sign up with us. And then, of course, you really want to start talking and building some partnerships with other people in your community who are interested in your issues. Get an advocacy plan together. Start talking to each other and figuring, oh, that's important to us too. Have you met with your state legislator? Let's do some stuff together. Start kind of that planning idea. It's a really good time to do that. And then after the governor releases her budget, The appropriation subcommittees in the House and Senate are going to meet to craft their own versions of the annual state spending plan, also known as the budget. So when we have straight Democratic control or straight Republican control, they're more than likely going to go off of the governor's budget. When we have divided government, which is what we've had previously, a lot of times they might not even start with that. They might take a few things, they might not, they just start with their own. And so you're going to have more of that bumping of heads when we have divided government. When you have full party control, they're more than likely going to be on the same page, and we'll probably see a lot of what's in there in their budget as well. Well, it doesn't mean they might not have their own ideas and that everything will go. They certainly will, but they're more likely going to be on the same page. So what can you do during this time? This is a really good time to find out who's on those subcommittees and when testimony is scheduled. So there's one, the appropriation committee is huge. So there's a huge appropriation subcommittee, and then that committee breaks into a bunch of different subcommittees for all the different budgets that we have. And so you want to find out who's on those subcommittees. And remember, this is the best time for public input. And you can provide that testimony or communicate with those subcommittee members and your own legislators. And if you can't actually attend those meetings, you can submit written testimony for those subcommittees. To find out again who's on those subcommittees, you're going to want to go to www.legislature.mi.gov, and you can find out what those subcommittees are for both the House and the Senate, because they will be slightly different, and who sits on those committees. So that takes place all the way to April. Through April and May, the subcommittee budgets start to move through both the House and Senate. So they're moving from out of committee onto the floor. Again, you're going to have possible amendments at both the committee level and at the floor during final debate. So again, if you're still seeing things that you don't like, you want to continue to contact your legislators about your issues and concerns and those portions of the budgets that you support or oppose. From late May to early June, this is when conference committees happening. So they're going to be ironing out the differences between the budgets passed by both the House and Senate. Again, conference committee changes are sent to all legislators for final approval, but amendments are not allowed at that point, so they can't change those things. You can also find out who sits on those conference committees, and if you're still seeing things you don't like, guess what? You can communicate with them as well. And guess where you can find that information? Legislature.mi.gov. Now, the legislature must present their final budget bills to the governor by July 1st. This was put in because a lot of school budgets, their budgets start in July, and the actual budget and final budget is not due till October 1st. They have to have it to the governor by then. If they don't, the government will go into shutdown. So because of that and the school budgets being earlier, they want to try to get that budget done way before that. So we're not threatening shutdown and things like this. So the goal is to have it by July 1st, but they don't have to have it by July 1st. So that is the goal, but the absolute deadline is October 1st. So if you're still seeing things in the budget that you don't like, guess what? Don't forget the governor. Contact her about areas of concern for you, because guess what? She's got line item veto power. So if she doesn't like parts in a budget, she can take those individual things out. She doesn't have to veto the whole thing. She can go line by line and not have that money appropriated. So after that time, October to February, the process really starts all over again, and the governor and state departments are already beginning to prepare the budget. So you want to really keep building relationships with your state legislator, and if you've got Health and Human Services or you want to see more money in those things, you might want to talk to those department heads as well. So that is our state budget cycle, and again, it's a continuous cycle that happens all the time. So some things you want to think when you want to influence the state budget is you really want to make sure you're meeting with your legislators. Let them know that you're watching the state budget and that certain things are critical to you. You want to build that ongoing relationship with them. And even if your legislators don't sit on the committees that appropriate funds, they will have a vote on the final budget. So those relationships are important. Plus, they may have relationships with those that do sit on those appropriations committees. And so they can talk to them as well. Second is you're going to want to make sure you have good sources of timely information about the issues you care about. So again, the league is always monitoring the state budget and we have regular updates. We just had an update about the governor's budget. And pretty soon we'll have an update on paper as well, or PDF that you can read as well. And things happen, behind closed doors, and sometimes it's a little notice, and so you can always get updates from us. The other thing you want to think about is recognizing your expertise. Yes, what you have to say and think is very important. State budgets can be very technical and complex, but they boil down to a plan for spending about available resources that communities need and value. So if you see something in the budget that you don't think is going to benefit your community, like to see more money for something else, absolutely. You know what's happening. Think about early childcare, and they're advocating for many things that have to do with childcare right now and early learning. And there are many experts in that, and they have a really huge say on what should be happening. And so they need to own that expertise and make sure you're communicating that with your representatives and those on those committees. And again, data is really important, but those stories that you all have are super important and often move the heart a lot easier than the data does. So fourth is you want to take advantage of regular scheduled opportunities for public testimony. Again, all the appropriations subcommittees generally take public testimony during that time, and they want to hear from you. And even if you can't be there, you can submit written testimony. And so it's really important to do that if you're able. And then of course, we talked about it earlier, don't forget the governor. She's got that line item veto power, and she absolutely has used it in the past, will use it again. And she's also negotiating with the legislature and legislative leaders. So let her know what's important to you. And with that, we're going to dive into the state budget. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it on over to my colleague, Renelle Weathers.
Hello, and thank you so much, Jamie. And there was a lot to process, right? So take a deep breath and please, and as we go along through the final piece of our recording, maybe stop the recording sometimes if you write down another question. And please do email us those questions. And our email addresses will be at the end of the slide. You can always contact KConnect also with your questions if somehow you don't have our email addresses. So I'm going to share my screen and let's get started. Just a minute, as soon as I'm able to do that, Jamie can give me sharing ability. And just as Jamie's doing that, and one thing you may not know is that Jamie and I both currently are at the Michigan League Public Policy, but before that, we both had government roles. So Jamie worked for U.S. Senator Gary Peters. I worked for a U.S. Congressman, Mark Schauer, but also in a state Senate office as well. So we have a vast amount of knowledge. Also was a national lobbyist as well. And so please ask us questions, even if something we don't cover, but please be sure to ask the questions. And I'll share my screen. We'll get started. And we'll do the dive. And it's great to see the blue waters. I know we've had a lot of ice and snow and things, so hopefully we're coming out of that, and spring will be here soon. Let's dive in. First, let's go. What's the purpose of the state budget? It establishes a plan for state expenditures, right? How to spend the money. It identifies means of financing those expenditures, like how they're going to finance it. It allocates available resources, right, according to both the administration and legislative priorities. It also distributes state resources to local governments, other external service providers. through different vehicles like revenue sharing and such. It also provides tools to monitor spending and to hold agencies and departments accountable. And many times those are through the boilerplate language of the budget bills. And we'll go into a little detail about that. So we're going to give an overview of the governor's proposed budget, and the governor just released her budget on February 8th. And now the budgets are in the hand of the legislature. The governor proposes, the legislature disposes, right? And the governor has 30 days from the day that legislative session starts in order to produce her budget. If it's an election, if it's the first term, first year, then she or he has 60 days. Our governor is she, and so we'll be using that pronoun. And let's kind of get a grounding on some terms. So I'll share language of terminology, and this is something you should get used to hearing. Fiscal year, we talked about that. Our state's fiscal year is the same as the federal government. It's October 1st through September 30th. Appropriation is the authority to spend funds. Jamie went into the know your leadership. She mentioned the appropriation chairs, why they're so important to have the authority to spend funds. And they lead that process. And an appropriation is not a mandate to spend, right? From our state constitution dictates when the governor is to release her budget. Also dictates the fact that funds cannot be spent without an appropriation by the legislature. The governor can't say, okay, here, I'm giving this money out. No, the state legislature has to appropriate those dollars through their process. Line item. This is a specific appropriation amount in a budget bill which establishes spending authorization for a particular program or function. So you have a lot of big bills, school aid bills. You have the education bill. There's line items. We'll go through and navigate through some of those documents. Boilerplate, right? That's language in the bill that directs, limits or restricts the line item expenditure. It gives like sunsets. If a bill is only going to last 5 years, that will be in the boilerplate language. And also boilerplate refers to any other bill that it amends or impacts. Lapse. So when funds are appropriated, sometimes they go unspent or unobligated. If that happens, then it's lapse. And then the legislature can actually put those dollars in other pots. Omnibus. There's a budget bill that packages smaller bills in one larger bill. And so the Michigan legislature typically, they do that in 2 bills. They do a school bus, which is we call that the school bus is the K through 12 public schools. And then they do it through all the other departments are lumped into the omnibus bill. So usually when you hear about the budget, it passes usually in 2 bills. And remember to write questions down and please email us. Let's get started. So first, this number, right? The governor's budget recommendation, $79.4 billion adjusted gross. Where's the number come from? Does it come from just thin air? Do they, look at last year's or previous years? Well, there is a consensus revenue estimating conference. We call it CREC, C-R-E-C, Consensus Revenue Estimating Conference. It meets twice a year. It meets in January and May. They meet in January. That means the administration's budget director, economists from across the state. These are public meetings that anyone can view and watch, where they look at how the money is coming in and what kind of laws or bills have changed or whatever, or have dictated how money is coming, how taxes are coming in. What is the tax forfeiture and things like that are coming to the state, either individual income taxes, businesses, how are the sales tax, how those monies coming in, and everything's going to change. And so they will do a projection for what kind of funds the governor or the legislature will have in order to appropriate. And this year they met in January, and the number that came out was $79.4 billion. This includes the $9 billion they had as supplemental dollars in last year that was unspent last year. And so all this is included in the governor's budget. And they also showed that those numbers, that 79.4 billion, and some of the funding coming from the school aid fund and general fund, those dollars are going to stay pretty stable over the next 4 years. They also showed that. So, and so let's look at the school omnibus and the general omnibus I talked about previously. The governor's budget recommendation spends about $23.6 billion total in preschool, K through 12, community colleges, and universities, and financial aid, with the vast majority of funding coming from state school aid fund. The general omnibus recommendation was all the other departments totals $55.8 billion of the 79. Over half of this coming from federal dollars, and the remaining relatively evenly split between restricted funds and state general funds. So historically, federal funding makes up over 40% of our budget. This year is no exception, with about 41% of the governor's recommendation coming from federal funds. As you see, that's historically coming. You see in 2020 and 2021 a little bit higher. That's from the COVID dollars coming to our state, and the opera dollars coming to our funds, into our state. 24.5 coming from school aid fund, 15.1 coming from restricted funds like transportation funds and fees and fines. About 18.7% of the budget recommendation coming from general fund, which is the state's most discretionary dollars. So actually, state legislature has governance over about $15 billion of that 79.4. So when we talk about making cuts or changes, they're talking about the $15 billion. It's about $14.8 billion, but $15 billion will round it up. So majority of our dollars are mandated either by restrictions, by our Constitution, or by federal government. Most of the state budget, nearly 80% of the total, and over 75% of the state general fund allocations is used to fund health and human services. And some of this is required in order to draw down federal funds. So in order to draw down that 42%, some of it has to be done in order to meet certain requirements from the federal government. This leaves relatively few general fund dollars to pay for other services on which Michigan businesses, workers, families, and communities rely. So you see these large amounts, right? So we look at that. Those are the three big categories that most of our budget goes to. And so here I want to show where are the major sources of revenues. And the dollars are off because this is from a previous fiscal year, but the percentages are correct. So 63% comes from income tax, 90% from sales and use tax, then 9% from net business taxes. This makes up the money from general funds. So that $15 billion that we'll have this year, those are the percentages of where the funds come from. School aid fund. The majority comes from sales and use taxes, 48%. By our Constitution, 2% of all sales tax goes into school aid fund. And then income tax, 22%, and then property tax, the other 15% here. And so just understand where those come from. A lot of times people ask about the lottery. Lottery is only about $1 billion of the school aid. So the 23.6 billion, it's 1 billion about that comes from the lottery. All right, take a deep breath again, and hopefully that made some kind of sense to you, or that you followed it pretty well. If not, sometimes you may have to go back through it again, and please don't forget that we are available to answer questions. So we're going to go into there's two sites that the league uses to kind of look at the budget. It's the House Physical Agency or the Senate Physical Agency. we lean more towards the house physical. We think it's easier to follow. So for those sites and for the information that Jamie gave you, you have kind of the tools for the advocacy. And so we're going to go into this site. So the house physical. And as we mentioned, so as you notice on the right of the screen is all the different departments. And these departments all have, when Jamie mentioned about the appropriation committees, subcommittees, there are subcommittees for all of these departments. And so we're going to go into, you can look at the current reports, our current fiscal year, which is fiscal year 23. You can go to current reports in this area here. Or if you just go into either of these budget areas, you can get what's happening currently. We're going to focus on the governor's proposed budget, which is for 23-24, which will begin October 1st. First, it has to pass the House and Senate. This is the governor's recommendation. And you'll notice that you can slide down different pages here, and I'll go to page 8, and it gives the overview. And it shows here the adjusted gross, 79, this is in billions, the $79.4 billion. It also shows you what's been spent year to date for the this current year. As of 2/8, this is what the dollars are looking like for that. And you see the general fund for 2023 was about 17 billion. Some of those come of some of additional dollars in the budget. This year, as I mentioned, it's like 14.8 billion is the general fund. That's the amount of money that the legislature has to actually have governance over. And so we're going to go to back to the physical agency page and go into departments. So let's use Health and Human Services. So in here, as I mentioned, you can get the current information that's going on for this budget year. We're going to focus on the governor's recommendation. Now, as the budget process proceeds, this also will include what the House what the House passes or what the Senate passes. And you'll be able to see, you can watch all those committee hearings, the appropriation hearings, you can watch all of those, and we'll go to that slide as well. So let's look at the Health and Human Services that the government recommends. So for this year, if you look under the for fiscal year 23-24, it's about $36 billion, and you see it's increased from this present fiscal year by a little over $2 billion. And here where you find all the boilerplate language and the specifics of the budget. I'm gonna go to sorry, excuse me, the child welfare caseloads. Right, you have the details. What comes from TANF, the federal. TANF is also federal, but it's the federal. You have local, private, and state restricted, and then the general fund. It shows what is currently, and it shows the change from for the proposal. For the child welfare caseloads, it's going to be less. So $794 million. It's going to be minus $31 million. So it'll be $763 million for that. Meantime, that's because, and here is the details of why it includes a reduction of 31 million based on current caseload projections as follows. So these pages give you the details of how they came up with that number and what was the thinking and intention for it. And number 16, foster family maintenance payment increase. All this is included here. It was not available in this current year. So this will be a funding that wasn't in the current year, but will be, if it's passed. The governor is proposing that they add $19 million for payment increases in the budget. Let's go down to page 4. And you have in here the public assistant caseloads. And it shows the current year, 4 billion. They're increasing it by $1 billion. So they're increasing it to 5.4 billion. And it shows the difference. If state restricted, it's going to be less. Anything right with parentheses is a minus, and anything else is plus. And it includes an increase of 1.1 billion to support estimated public assistance program caseloads. They expect increase from the current year. So these are all details that will be in this budget. And I'll go to one more page on here. Let's go to page 8, which shows you boilerplate, right? And shows you what's been revised, what's been new. And section 211, it prohibits appropriations from being used to restrict or interfere with actions related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so these are all things that have been added or removed or added from the or revised for the bill. These are boilerplate language. Okay, so let's go into a different area. Let's go into school aid fund. As I mentioned before, you can get the minutes from what happened for the current year. We're going to look into this year. As you see, this is how more information has been available, even though that was available earlier this week. It now has district impact on the from the district and section by section highlights. And let's go into a few of those areas in school aid. And so the school aid, as we mentioned before, for last year's school aid. Now, the other number of 23.6 billion earlier, that included higher ed, community colleges, financial aid. So there's about a $3 billion difference in that area. So and so this is about $21 billion for K through 12, and that is a 1.2 billion increase from the previous year. So let's go into foundational allowance, the details about what makes up this budget. Early literacy instruction, that's new, 300 million for that. So all these are how you can go through and see what's changes and what's the intent of the governor's proposed budget. The universal school breakfast and lunch, that's new, 160. So the governor's recommending $160 million for universal school breakfast and lunch. So these things that you agree with, then as Jamie went through the budget cycle, you can weigh in on the fact that you support this, and that you agree, and this is part of a value or priority you hold as well. Okay. And also they have the Great Start Readiness Program, number 9, and it shows that, and you see the 83 million that's been reduced for the current budget, but explains here what that means. And it says that see here, 83 million federal dollars increase for a total of 54, and so they eliminated that, but also it was because of the increase from the general fund. So you see they make sure they go through a lot of detail on what's available. And so we're going to go to back to the main page, and you may want to have other areas you're interested in. So you can stop the recording, or after recording's finished, go through some of these other areas and see what's included and what budgets that you're interested in, what's happening with the budget, either what's happening now currently in this fiscal year 23, or what the governor proposes. As I mentioned, as Jamie showed you in the budget cycle, the governor's proposal, because the legislature is also a majority Democratic Party, they started with the governor's budget, and now there are hearings and committee hearings to look and see where the numbers are going to be. Are they going to be the same? Going to be different? It's rarely the same. There's always some differences, and even when you have parties of the same party. Let's go a minute into the district impact. This is just been added. This is a lot of numbers, goes through every district, right? All the impact of every district. And so this may be interesting to you all in here. And so if you have, and let's go to Kent County. In Kent County, they go all school districts. the total change in foundational amounts. You get a lot of details on how your district is being impacted by these pages. And then they have the, okay, that's too late. Get out there. And then section by section highlights. This is very detailed. So there's a lot of, and as mentioned earlier, that each budget, they're going to be adding more and more information through the process. And so you can get really deep into the weeds for that. And hopefully that give you a little bit of insight how to navigate it. And hopefully you feel comfortable navigating this site as well. And we'd be happy to continue guiding you through it, and just reach out to us. I'm going to go to one more site, the legislature.mi.gov, Michigan Legislature, just to show you how to go to committees. These are committees. If you want to go to the House Appropriations Committee, you have the Senate Appropriations Committee. And so you go to the home page. Unless we're in House, we'll stick with House. So you get into the chair is Angela Whitworth, and you go to the members, and then you go to the committee clerk, and then you go into all the committees and subcommittees to see the appropriations and other committees. See who's going to be on their appropriations. These are all the subcommittees, right? And what's happening with them when they're meeting. They have the broadcast schedule. Everything's available on this site for you to find out. And as I mentioned before, the clerk is really important, and to get information about what's happening on these hearings. Okay, so hopefully you're able to find stuff yourself and to kind of wade through that site of House Fiscal Agency and really dig in to get the information that you need in order to see where you align on your priorities and where there needs to be some changes. I'll turn back over to Jamie.
Thank you so much. And as you said, we're never one and done. So you can always contact us anytime. We're happy to do that. So don't hesitate to do that. If you need information, if you need just, hey, I'm having trouble walking through this, would you be willing to do that? Absolutely, we will do that with you. So there are lots of ways that you can continue to engage. Again, get information, sign up for those committee notices. I wouldn't sign up for everyone. Your email will be so full, but definitely the ones that are of interest to you. And start collecting your own stories and those of people that you know. It's so important to have those stories. Coordinate with people and partners who are interested in the same thing you are, and definitely meet with your lawmakers, whether at their office, at their coffee hour. Send those letters, send written testimony, or actually go testify. It's so important to do that. And again, they really do want to hear from you. Again, you can always look at our Ask Candidate questions, which is also just helpful to know on issues. Share your information with your networks. Again, we've got those budget analysis, we've got those budget policy and briefs. We'll continue to have updates and webinars that you can attend as well. We've got fact sheets. So we'll definitely be a resource. So as you're digging into an area and you want to know more about it, or if there's any research that we have on it, we'll be happy to help you find that too. And again, if it's just navigating the website, again, we'll help you with that too. So don't hesitate to do that. Also, if you just want to know what's happening with the legislature every week, tune in to our Yays and Nays. It's every Friday at 11 a.m. with our host, Laura Ross, who's the Director of Communications. And again, there are our emails. Please don't hesitate to reach out. We really do want to help you. Again, that's our weathers at mlpp.org, Jay Vasovic at mlpp.org, and of course on the east side, Hannah Gayani, so H. Gayani at mlpp.org. All right. Thank you all so much for your time today. We hope you found this helpful. And again, last time, don't hesitate to reach out with those questions. Take care.